Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. I want to welcome you to the Sea Services Leadership Association's Joint Women's Leadership Virtual Series. But first, I have to thank our sponsors, Johnson & Johnson, USAA, and Amazon Military. Without their support, we couldn't be bringing you these wonderful sessions as our COVID friend kneecapped us for the in-person Joint Women's Leadership Symposium. So again, thank you to Johnson & Johnson, USAA, and Amazon Military. And during this session, we want to hear from you. We would love to have an interactive Q&A with General Wolfenbarger, excuse me, ma'am. Through the Zoom platform, you'll be prompted to complete polling questions. I believe the General has 3 of those. We would value your participation, please. Zoom participants can submit questions in the Q&A box or chat with other participants. If joining us on Facebook Live, please type your questions into the comment box and the speaker will address them as well. I have to do the disclaimer, which is the views and opinions expressed in this webinar are not endorsed by and do not represent the views of the Sea Services Leadership Association, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, or any other federal entity, and this session is being recorded. So I will be your moderator today. My name is Master Chief Lonnie Kell-Jones. I'm retired United States Coast Guard. I retired back in 2018 after 31 years active service, and I moved on to be the SSLA treasurer a year later because I was bored with sitting at home. So I've been doing this, like I said, for about 12 months, and I really enjoy being a member of the Sea Services Leadership Association. I would like to introduce General Janet Wolfenbarger, United States Air Force retired. She retired from the Air Force in July of 2015. In her last assignment before retirement, she served as Commander, Air Force Materiel Command, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. The command employs some 80,000 people and manages $60 billion annually, executing the critical mission of warfighter support through leading-edge science and technology, cradle-to-grave life cycle weapons systems management, world-class developmental test and evaluation, and world-class depot maintenance and supply chain management. She was commissioned in 1980 as a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy and began her career in acquisition as an engineer at Eglin Air Force Base, Florida. She has held a variety of assignments at Headquarters Electronic Security Command and Air Force Systems Command. General Wolfenbarger held several positions in the F-22 System Program Office at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, served as the F-22 Lead Program Element Monitor at the Pentagon, and was the B-2 System Program Director for the Aeronautical Systems Center, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. She also commanded ASC's C-17 Systems Group, Mobility Systems Wing. She was the Services Director of the Air Force Acquisition Center of Excellence at the Pentagon, then served as Director of the Headquarters AFMC Intelligence and Requirements Directorate, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. She served as AFMC Vice Commander from December 2009 to September 2011. Prior to her last assignment, General Wolfenbarger was the Military Deputy, Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition at the Pentagon here in DC. After her retirement from the Air Force, in addition to serving as the chair of DACOWITS, General Wolfenbarger was elected to serve as on the AECOM Board of Directors and as a trustee for the Falcon Foundation. And that's her bio that's with DACOWITS, but I wanted to point out a couple of things. General Wolfenbarger was also one of the first female cadets to attend the U.S. Air Force Academy, and she was also the first female 4-star in the United States Air Force. With that, General Wolfenbarger, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Well, thank you very much, Lonnie. And I do want to thank you right at the start for inviting me to present this talk on DACOWITS in this webinar format. I wanted to share just a few slides, which are made up of pictures, which I thought would be fun for our attendees to take a look at. And really, I'm just going to spend my time before we open up for Q&A, just giving you a little bit of a retrospective on DACOWITS and the history of this really important committee, a little bit of a view on what we are currently focused on, and then a little bit of my perspective on the work that DACOWITS does and how important it is to the Department of Defense. So this first chart really does focus on the history of DACOWITS. It's got some wonderful pictures from a time well past. And I like to think about women's service in our United States military as being absolutely integral to the success of the military. And when you think about this and you look back through history, you'll realize that long before women were actually granted the right to vote in this country, they were serving in our nation's military, all the way back to the American Revolution, through the Civil War, through World War I. And then if you move back to World War II, I really think it was the scope of women's service to the nation during World War II that foreshadowed the formation of DACOWITS, the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services. It was following the conclusion of World War II that President Truman really radically changed the structure of the United States military by signing in 1948 the Women's Armed Services Integration Act, which granted women the permanent status to serve in both the regular and reserve forces. And then just 3 years later, during the Korean War, DACOWITS was established by then Secretary of Defense George C. Marshall to advise and help increase the recruitment of women into the US military. So initially when DACOWITS was formed, it was focused on bringing more women in to serve in the military. And when you put this in perspective, back in 1951, when DACOWITS was first established, you have to think back to the history at that time. At that time of our inception, there was a 2% cap, which limited the number of women serving. There were restrictions that prevented women from reaching the highest grades. For instance, the highest level a woman could obtain at that time was 06, and there could only be one per service branch. Women had yet to be integrated into the military service academies. It was a focus area of this committee, and I like to think that I am personally a beneficiary of, along with many, many other women, of the focus that DACOWITS placed on opening up the service academies to women for the first time. Back when DACOWITS was first formed, women were being immediately discharged upon pregnancy, and servicewomen really did face inequalities in their access to combat roles and benefits. That didn't occur till much, much later, where all positions that had been closed to women were open to women. And in general, as you would expect, women experienced gender bias because of the heavy male-dominated military culture of the time. So that's kind of how DACOWITS got its start. So moving on to the next chart, which again has some additional pictures, I'd like to share with you a little bit of some of DACOWITS history, and then move quickly into focusing on where we are putting our effort today in terms of study areas. DACOWITS is one of the oldest Department of Defense Federal Advisory Committees. When it was first stood up back in 1951, it was comprised of 50 civilian women. Today, if you fast forward almost 70 years, the committee consists of up to 20 civilian, both women and men. Most of us now retired senior military members ourselves, although it is important, I believe, to the committee's work to include a percentage, usually about 20% of the committee, who have pure civilian backgrounds, to give us that wide perspective on the study topics that we are asked to review for the department. All of us members of DACOWITS are volunteers. We serve as special government employees. All of our members are appointed for a 4-year term of service. We serve without compensation, and we do perform a variety of duties. And those duties include visiting military installations annually. We conduct a review and evaluation of current research on military women on the topics that we have been authorized to study. And every year we develop an annual report, which which generally is about 250 pages or more, which includes the recommendations that the committee has formed on the issues that we were asked to study to and submitted to the Secretary of Defense. Over the past 70 years, our charter has evolved from that initial focus on just recruitment when the committee was first formed in 1951 to now expand beyond that recruitment to include retention, employment, integration, well-being, and treatment of women in the armed forces. And this is the point which I thought I'd pause and ask my first polling question to give the audience a chance to participate. My question that I'd like to put forth to you all is, prior to participating in this webinar, were you familiar with DACOWITS? Yes or no? I'd like to give it a few seconds to see how you all respond to that question. It's always interesting to me to discern how familiar folks are today with DACOWITS. Okay, and Lonnie, when will I know the results of our survey?
There you go.
Our poll. Oh, here we go. I see it now. It's up on screen now. So 62%, I have that right? Yes. 38% no. That's really positive. I appreciate you all participating in that poll. I like seeing the number of yeses versus nos being higher. I thought I'd share with you next the topics that the committee has been authorized to explore for this cycle, for our 2021 cycle. Overall, we are chartered to provide independent advice and recommendations on specific study topics, and those topics do come to us from the Department of Defense, from the Office of Personnel and Readiness, Under Secretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. We have 8 of them this year that we've been authorized to review, and I'm going to ask you a few more polling questions as we go through our current areas of study. The first one deals with co-location and geographic stability retention initiatives. The committee continues to be interested in the retention of servicewomen, and we do believe that co-location of dual military members, and really separate and distinct from dual military, geographic stability could very well be contributing factors to success in achieving higher rates of retention. So here's my next polling question. Do you believe that the service's dual military co-location policies should be expanded to include non-married parents? So today, most of the services limit those policies to apply to married dual military couples. And we're interested as a committee in whether or not those policies should be universally expanded to include non-married parents. And we're waiting on results. We got a high percentage of yeses there. 91% yes. Well, thank you for that. In fact, just so you know, of all the services, the Air Force actually has made that change in its policies. It was a recommendation of this committee a few years ago. The next of the 8 topics, I'm on topic number 2, is women in space. The committee recognizes that the standing up of a new service really enables key opportunities to shape a talent-driven and diverse workforce that can incorporate modern policies, maybe different policies relative to recruitment and retention than the other services have traditionally explored. So that's an area of interest of the committee. The third of 8 topics is inclusivity in the selective service system, otherwise known as the draft. And so I have a polling question on this one, but first let me set up the polling question by sharing with you that in 2015, the committee made the following recommendation, and this is a quote. This was just before my time on the committee. The Secretary of Defense should recommend legislation that mandates women between the ages of 18 and 26 fulfill the same selective service registration requirements as men. So during 2021, DACOWITS will examine the impacts of including women in the draft. And my polling question to you all is, do you believe the selective service, the draft, should include women? Yes or no? Oh, that was 100% yes. Thank you for that. You know, there had been support in the courts for the current system that excludes women up until the point at which women were now allowed to serve in all those previously closed positions due to the combat relationship. And so there are court cases that are working their way through the system, and there is an interest, I think, in by the Department of Defense to figure out a way forward in this regard. So thank you for that. That was a ringing endorsement of the previous, I think, recommendation that the committee had submitted to the Secretary of Defense. The fourth of 8 study topics deals with women in aviation. In 2020, so the cycle that was just completed, we began our examination of women in aviation. And for 2021, for this research year, we will continue to review this topic. We remain concerned that women have been serving as aviators really all the way back to the 1970s in some select platforms, and that with the combat exclusion policy was lifted for all aviation platforms in 1993, well before all of the positions were open to women that had been combat related. But in the aviation career field, since 1993, all of those platforms have been open for women to serve in, and yet the overall percentage of female aviators remains low in comparison to their male counterparts. And so it's an area that the committee is very interested in pursuing. The fifth of our 8 study topics deals with gender integration. It is a topic that we have been studying in DACOWITS for the past few decades. Clearly a topic that is broad. The committee will continue reviewing the progress of the services gender integration implementation plans, which were approved by the Secretary of Defense back in March of 2016 after all of those previously closed positions to women had been opened. And in particular, the committee this year will focus on women's leadership opportunities, the integration of women into the special operations arena, the continued integration of Marine Corps recruit training. Unlike all the other service branches, the Marine Corps is not fully integrated in their recruit training. And then just in general, a look at culture relative to gender integration. The sixth topic is very timely. It is the Army Combat Fitness Test, the ACFT. During 2020, again, the last cycle, we began our examination of the development and conducted a preliminary look at the preliminary implementation. There was a piloting of the new age and gender neutral Army Combat Fitness Test, the ACFT, which replaces the nearly 40-year-old Army Physical Fitness Test, the APFT. It was in October of this year, just a few months ago, that the ACFT was approved as the new official test of record for the whole of the United States Army. And so for our 2021 research year, we will continue to review this topic, and we are concerned about any potential impacts to our servicewomen. The seventh of 8 topics deals with pregnancy in the military, and I'll have a polling question on this one here in just a minute. The committee will assess the impacts of pregnancy on a servicewoman's ability to progress in her military career. Over the past few decades, DACOWITS has been tasked to examine pregnancy and parenthood issues. And more recently, our focus for this year is on pregnancy discrimination. It has arisen as an area that really we think requires further exploration. And so here is my polling question on this topic. How easy or difficult do you feel it is for the members of your service to have a family and continue to advance their careers in the military? Lots of choices here. Very easy, somewhat difficult, very difficult. More choices, took longer to respond. Okay, somewhat difficult is no very easies. There were an equal number of somewhat easy, very difficult, but the vast majority feel as though it's somewhat difficult to to balance between a career and a family. Thank you for those responses. And then the last, the 8th of 8 of our approved study topics is on childcare, improving childcare provisions for servicewomen. And I'll have another polling question on this one, but would share with you that over the last 40 years, the last 4 decades, DACOWITS has made 35 recommendations specific to childcare. It has been a perennial interest item, not just of the committee, but of the service members that we have the opportunity to interact with during our installation visits. Comprehensive childcare continues to be an ongoing challenge for service members. Service members with children do represent a large percentage of the overall force, which makes adequate childcare really critical to the department's mission. And the committee in particular remains concerned with the ongoing challenges pertaining to childcare, especially for servicewomen. So here's my polling question. This is the last of the polling questions that I was going to ask today. How easy or difficult do you feel it is for parents in the military to obtain readily available childcare? And again, you have 4 choices here. Very easy, somewhat difficult, and very difficult. Okay. And somewhat difficult was the majority. Somewhat easy and very difficult were got a fair percentage, actually. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for those inputs. Well, so to effectively study all of those 8 topics, the committee is divided into 3 subcommittees. It's been this way since I've been on the committee. We have a recruitment and retention subcommittee, an employment and integration subcommittee, and a well-being and treatment subcommittee. And each of those subcommittees conducts research on the topics that pertain to that particular subcommittee focus area. They develop recommendations. Those recommendations are then voted on by the full committee in a public forum. And then each of those subcommittees contributes to the creation of that annual report for the Secretary of Defense. In addition, a major tenet of DACOWITS' work throughout its history has been directly engaging service members during our in-person visits to U.S. military installations. Over the past 7 decades, DACOWITS has conducted over 750 installation visits to obtain firsthand information from both female and male service members. You know, I think this was probably this past year, 2020, was the first time in certainly recent history, I wouldn't be able to say going all the way back to 1951, that we were precluded from conducting installation visits because of the pandemic. And we're hopeful that that we'll be able to conduct those installation visits in this new cycle coming up in 2021. I have to tell you, I'm in my 5th year of service on DACOWITS. In my 5th year as the chair. I have to tell you that having that opportunity to interact with service members is truly one of the highlights of the work that DACOWITS committee members get to undertake. There is just, it's refreshing to understand and hear from all the folks that are wearing a uniform today. And it's it can be eye-opening as well to understand their perspectives. Truly one of the highlights of serving on DACOWITS. Okay, we can move to the next chart, which is really just some more pictures. I really wanted to share with you some graphic depictions here of some of our significant DACOWITS contributions. So historically, we believe, and I believe the department would say, that our recommendations have been instrumental in affecting changes to both laws and policies that pertain to military women. And I thought I'd just hit some high points of some of the areas of success that the committee has made recommendations on that have contributed to improving military service for women. One of those success areas was in the early on in benefits, salaries, and entitlements that were received by servicewomen. Another success area was in career progression of servicewomen, which includes career planning and trajectories. It includes transitions or assistance related to assignments and placements, and it includes leadership development. Another success area was policies that were aimed at supporting families and their dependents. Another success area was in equalizing standards or guidelines for genders. That included integrating women into those previously closed positions or units. It included addressing barriers that prevented full integration, and it has included increasing the number and percentage of women in the underrepresented fields. Another success area has been in focusing on increased marketing and accession and recruitment of women, really getting after tailoring the messaging across the service branches to attract more women to serve. Another success area has been in female attrition and retention. The statistics would tell you, if you look at them, that we are losing women at higher rates across the military services at varying points in their careers. And so the committee has been focused for a number of years on how do we address that attrition and retain more women after we've brought them into the services. Another area of attention has been, and success in terms of recommendations embraced by the department, has been sexual harassment, and I would include sexual assault, although I would share with you that during my tenure on the committee, there has been a separate, in fact, two separate federal advisory committees stood up to address the sexual assault portion of this arena of sexual harassment and sexual assault. I would share with you that during my tenure on the committee, we did have success in the identifying early the inappropriate use of social media as a means of sexual harassment or gender discrimination, and putting forth recommendations to the department on how to address that. Another success area has been on unit culture and morale. Another on women's health. We've had a focus in the past on reproductive health and on improvements to the health of deployed servicewomen. We've had a success in making recommendations on properly fitting combat equipment and uniforms. And we've had a continued focus, and I believe success, on increased parental leave authorization. Those are the topics I pulled out. We did this year as part of our annual report, which you will see when it's released by the Department of Defense, a retrospective, since we're getting ready to celebrate our 70th anniversary coming up in next year in 2021. And we did a retrospective on the committee itself, its formation, its change, its evolution over those 70 years. And we did a look at where the common themes were of past recommendations. And so that's where that list that I just shared with you emanates from. It's from that historical retrospective that we had recently accomplished. So, but truly, this is just a small summary of the full range of topics that DACOWITS has examined and made recommendations on over the past 70 years. And we did do an accounting. The DACOWITS staff assigned to the Pentagon did an accounting of the number of recommendations since 1951 that DACOWITS has submitted. It is well over 1,000 recommendations to the Secretary of Defense, and their accounting demonstrated that as of this year, as of 2020, approximately 97% of those recommendations have been either fully or partially implemented by the department. Really, I think an endorsement of the importance of the work that this committee performs for the Department of Defense. Let's see, and I would, before I move on to the next chart, I would share with you that it's interesting to note, and I think probably pertinent to note, that quite frequently we find that language taken directly from our annual reports is lifted and added into the work that our elected officials do in creating a National Defense Authorization Act every year. Again, another validation. Not only is our report useful and helpful to the Department of Defense, it turns out that it's also, I think, perused very thoroughly by our elected officials in Congress as well. Next chart, please, and really my last chart, and then I hope to leave lots of time for questions. I really wanted to talk about how the legacy continues. I do believe that the variety of issues pertaining to the support of women in the United States military is reflected in the extent, the broad extent of topics that have been covered by DACOWITS recommendations throughout the past 7 decades. And I think building on that legacy and dedicated history, DACOWITS will continue to serve by providing independent advice and recommendations to the Secretary of Defense on matters pertaining to the recruitment, retention, employment, integration, well-being, and treatment of women in the military services. The committee will continue its work toward making recommendations to improve the lives of service women that I maintain will have lasting impacts beyond the current decade. And although our DACOWITS focuses by charter on efforts to support and improve the careers and opportunities of service women, in fact, all service members benefit when the committee's recommendations are implemented. The committee's rich history and sustained effort really live on as its members rigorously study relevant topics of concern to the Department of Defense, as we conduct installation visits, as we determine recommendations that will help guide the future of the U.S. military for years to come. I think DACOWITS has been highly influential in ensuring the advancement of women in the military. This committee has been at the forefront of many emerging issues, notifying the Department of Defense about issues and challenges that are facing service women, maybe well before they might otherwise be aware of them, and then making recommendations early to ensure that those issues are addressed just as soon as possible, as soon as they're raised. So, in conclusion, it is readily apparent to me, as the longest tenured chair of this important committee, that despite the vast and critical work that has been accomplished by the committee to date, DACOWITS work is not yet finished. Women play an essential role in an evolving military with constantly changing mission sets, and DACOWITS must continue to fulfill its mission by providing evidence-based recommendations that ensure women are provided opportunities to both thrive and prosper in all of the military services. And with that, Lanny, I think I hit the time mark that we were trying for me to hit, and I would now turn it back over to you to help moderate any questions that the audience might have.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, General. So just a reminder that if you have any questions for General Wolfenbarger, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box on your screen. If you're on Facebook Live, please message us your comments and we'll get you an answer. I kind of feel, I'm gonna open it up with a question, but I feel you probably already covered it because it's obvious that you're very passionate about it. But since DACOWITS was established in 1951, and as you pointed out, we're looking at 70 years since its inception next year, and with all the progress is made on recruiting and retaining women in the military service, do you feel there's still a need for DACOWITS? I think you hit on that point, but I'd like you to drive it home if you can.
Sure. In fact, let me do that in a very personal way. So I spent 35 years in the United States Air Force, and then you tack on the 4 before my active duty career started when I was in that first class of women out at the Air Force Academy. And I knew about DACOWITS from the time I was out at the Air Force Academy, that because it was such an important topic to the committee, they were very present across all of the service academies in seeing how well women were going to be embraced and integrated in that service academy environment. And then I was aware every time DACOWITS was visiting an installation that I happened to be assigned to throughout my 35-year career. So I knew what DACOWITS was. I knew how important the work was, but I wasn't really personally involved in any of the work that the committee had done until I retired in July of 2015. It was shortly after I retired that the Secretary of the Air Force asked if I might be willing to serve on the committee. And it takes a little bit of time from the point at which you say, yes, I'd be interested, to the point at which you're appointed. And that occurred for me in March of 2016. And I recall having my history and having my personal knowledge of DACOWITS, telling the then chair of DACOWITS when I first arrived at my first quarterly business meeting, that I felt our objective ought to be to put ourselves out of business. That there ought to be a time that there would no longer need to be a federal advisory committee dedicated to the well-being and fair treatment of service women. And then I sat through my first couple of quarterly business meetings, and I came to a whole different perspective of issues and opportunities to improve that I wasn't personally aware of in the time that I was wearing a uniform. I feel like I benefited in my military career from a whole host of advancements that I saw, I personally witnessed. It became clear to me when I served on DACOWITS, there is still work yet to be done. And so I came to the very firm conclusion that while I still believe there ought to be a time when we no longer need a DACOWITS, it's not in the near term. It's not on the near-term horizon. There is still hard work yet to be done by this committee. In fact, we kind of celebrate every March during Women's History Month. We always hold one of our quarterly business meetings in March, and we generally celebrate the publishing of the annual report from the previous year. We kind of focus on some of the progress that over the course of the committee's history, and then next year it'll be 70 years. And then we turn to the study topics at hand and realize, I think all of us who are currently serving on the committee realize there is work yet to be done.
Oh, great. Thanks, General. I appreciate that. So I have a question from Mary Jackson first. She says, thank you for the exceptional presentation. But she has, could you comment on whether DACOWITS compares military to corporate in terms of women issues, retention, childcare, equal pay, etc.? How do we compare to industry standards?
We actually do like to benchmark not only industry, but in many of our study topics, other foreign militaries and where they sit relative to some of the issues that we're studying. And so it really is study topic dependent, but if you were to peruse our previous reports, even if you go back for the last 4 or 5 years, you'll see that there are many of those study topics that really do pertain that the study of an external, in this case, civilian industry perspective, as the question asked, might very well be enlightening to the department to take a hard look at relative to benchmarking. In fact, in the report that's going to be released for 2020, I can tell you this because we voted on all of our recommendations in a public forum. So one of those recommendations actually asks the Secretary of Defense to share lessons learned across the services when it comes to exit and retention surveys to glean the lessons learned that each of the service branches are realizing, but also makes the specific recommendation to leverage best practices and lessons learned from civilian industry as well.
Excellent. Thank you, ma'am. So Pat, and I'm probably going to mess up her last name or his last name. I apologize up front. It looks like Sergio. The question was, why no topics regarding military sexual trauma, especially after Fort Hood report and many suicides of women who've experienced military sexual trauma?
So again, that is not a study topic for DACOWITS. Once there were separate advisory committees, federal advisory committees that were stood up to specifically focus on sexual assault and then the corresponding trauma that results from that. So interestingly, and I think by law, we operate under a law, all the federal advisory committees do. One of the tenets of the law precludes overlap amongst committees that have been approved to operate. And so the general counsel within the Department of Defense does a rigorous job of ensuring that the charters for each of the federal advisory committees do not overlap.
Okay. So I've got one from Paz Magat. I'm not good.
I know Paz.
You do. Okay.
I do.
From the Halifax International Security Forum.
Yes.
So they ask, what are some of the toughest barriers to implementation actually taking root and changing a service's culture or practice?
Oh, wow. Thanks, Paz, for that softball question. Oh my. So, isn't that the hardest thing? You can institute policies and rule sets, but really it's the culture change that has to take root. Excuse me, too much talking. Before I think we realize real change. And that is an area that the committee has focused on. How do we know whether or not the culture change is taking place? And so there have been recommendations that have been put forth relative to how do you assess that? The first, I think, action is to ensure that all of the rule sets are being embraced and followed, right? So a lot of times we have policies that have been established, and the real question is, are those policies being disseminated from the senior-most level down to the lowest levels within units? And then how are service members being trained on those policy changes? And I think probably a huge aspect of culture change is how is that behavior being modeled by members of that unit who are in leadership positions. So that's sort of been some of the focus of how the committee has looked at how you can ensure that culture change is occurring. It's a tough one though. It really is tough. And can I say that that's a huge part of what the committee learns in conducting our installation visits. It's where are things working and where are they not? You know, where is that information not being disseminated down to the lowest levels? Where are those policy changes that are intended to address some of those cultural issues? Where are they not being understood by individual service members? It really is illustrative. And you know, those installation visits, we approach them based on the study topics we've been asked to address, and we set a standard set of questions in focus groups. So that there's a process that we have to follow to gain information that is we're able to parse for common threads and themes across all the different groups that we engage with. But there's always a portion of those installation visits that we leave for open discussion at the end. And I would share this with you, that it's during those open-ended discussion sessions that we sometimes hear things that really warrant us asking the department if those are study areas that we could have for the future, because there clearly is a need for this committee to take those on for the department.
Thanks, General. I was actually, while you were speaking, I was writing that one down as, you know, do you ever get topics that you provide up to the Undersecretary of P&R from DACOWITS to help influence study topics? So thank you.
Yes.
Another question from Therese Krutzberg. She said, where would I find data numbers on dual military, married to non-mil spouse, divorced, single by rank, and by number of years in service when these events occurred? Also years of service when men versus women have their first dependent child, and the number of years after that event that they terminate their active duty service. Would this type of data be found in DACOWITS's reports, or would this need to be mined from data from the services?
Yeah, those are some detailed questions, and it may be that that kind of data in every case, and that was multiple parts to that question, is really not collected. For instance, you know, when dependent children are born in a career continuum, I don't know that that type of data is collected. But what we do as a committee is go to our source of data collection, which is a Department of Defense organization called Jammers. And I should know what it means, but it's but there is an entity that collects an awful lot of data. That's one of them, and there are a few others that our staff assigned to support DACOWITS can help us with. We ask all kinds of questions, and sometimes we get the answer that that data isn't collected, but in many cases it is, and we parse through an awful lot of numbers and figures and percentages to get to some conclusions that we provide back to the Secretary of Defense. I couldn't answer specifically some of those questions, but it's certainly worthy of you know, exploring whether there is that type of data collection through the various entities that do that for a living in the Department of Defense.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. So from Diane Dunn via our Facebook, I'd be interested in the resources, tools, and recommendations you have for using social media to reduce, prevent sexual assaults. I think they kind of moved away from the
Right. So it was a concern that was generated to the committee. It really came about, this was before my time, just before my time on the committee, that it was first raised as an issue. It was during our focus groups, during our installation visits, that service members were beginning to express concern about that inappropriate use of social media and the lack of any monitoring or any rule sets that actually controlled the expected, approved, correct behavior of service members when it comes to social media. So the real change that the committee recommended and then reinforced when the Marines United incident occurred, we said we have to have clear-cut policy in the Department of Defense relative to what's acceptable and what isn't. And there was action that had been taken, and then clearly are articulated in terms of dissemination, I believe, down to the lowest levels. As we kind of did focus visits, focus groups, after that occurred, we had the opportunity to explore a little bit whether folks understood what the expectations were. I hope that's helpful.
So I've got one for you that's from Norma Smehall, and this, I know Norma, so just like you know Paz, I know Norma. She wants to know, does the D cover all 7 armed forces, soon to be 8, or just the traditional 4 under DoD? Obviously, being in the Coast Guard, I'm curious who is advocating for us, especially with so many similar concerns and challenges. And she also thanks you for your continued service.
Well, thank you for that. I do feel like it's an opportunity to give back in a way that I never would have envisioned when I was wearing uniform, and to put you at ease. We do include the Coast Guard. So we actually have Coast Guard. Every time we ask questions of the Department of Defense services, now to include the U.S. Space Force, we also ask the Coast Guard when it's appropriate. And the vast majority of the work that the committee does is appropriate to the Coast Guard. And we have learned from some of the approaches that the Coast Guard has taken relative to some of the same issues they're experiencing that the other service branches are experiencing as well. In fact, in our 2019 report, I believe it was, we noted some work that the Coast Guard had commissioned relative to gender retention, retention of women, and why women were departing the Coast Guard. And we made the recommendation that the other services review that study to take the lessons learned that were applicable to them. So we do, and the other focus area that we have, it's not just the active, it's the reserve and the guard as well. So we really are trying hard to ensure that the work that we do touches all of those various entities where women serve. And as we bring in women or members to serve on the committee, we try hard to make sure, because we've got such a focus now on people that have served in the past, we make sure that we've got all those service entities represented. So we have a person from the Coast Guard who serves on the committee now, and we have members from the Guard and Reserve on the committee as well, and in future, hopefully from the Space Force. A little too soon for that.
Awesome. So I've got a question for you, ma'am. Actually, a couple of them, if I may. The first one was that I noted when I read through your annual report from 2019 that DACOWITS is provided the study topics via the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. And information is gathered from multiple sources in examining those topics. One such method mentioned, and you've touched on it a couple of times, is through visits to installations. Can you speak a little bit about how many installations are usually visited during a year and how they're selected?
Sure. So it is not work that the committee per se does. It is work that the staff that supports the committee does. And there's a good reason for that. So there are generally 10 installation visits that occur over about a 6-week period. We try hard to ensure that we hit each service, so 2 visits per service. And we meet with both service women as well as servicemen across both the officer and enlisted ranks. And the way that those installations are selected is determined via a couple of different filters. The first is focusing on the study topics that we've been asked to review. And so sometimes those study topics dictate which types of installations we might want to visit. For instance, this year I mentioned one of our study topics is women in aviation. And so we would then need to visit at least a couple of aviation type installations or bases in order to gather the information that we would need to gather to adequately address that study topic. Another factor that's considered by the staff is where the committee has been, usually within about the last 5 years, because we really try hard to rotate and not hit the same installation or base on a regular basis. And so we try hard to try to get to different installations over that about 5-year window. And then, as I mentioned, it's only about a 6-week time frame to hit 10 different installations, and it's a huge logistical challenge to make all that happen. And so sometimes there's a geography aspect of this. So where can we maybe geographically group different installations and bases and still address all those other things that we wanted to address, but to make the travel and those other logistical considerations easier to accommodate. So I hope that's helpful. We generally, on an installation visit window of about 6 weeks, we generally have the opportunity to engage with anywhere between 500 to 600 service members. So a substantial number of service members, clearly not representative statistically of the whole of the military, but really an opportunity to hear a whole host of different opinions on the topics that we've chosen.
I'm sure. And you mentioned a couple of times about the report that's coming out for 2020. Any idea when folks can expect to see that posted to the DACOWITS website?
Yeah, typically, so where we are now, I would share with you is we are on an annual research cycle, which overlaps a little bit. So as we're finishing one year, we're actually launching into the study topics for the next year to make the best use of the four quarterly business meetings in which we are all trying to get together to make good progress. And that's where the bulk of the work's done. There is individual work that occurs in between quarterly business meetings. So the quarterly business meeting that we just finished last week, the December quarterly business meeting, is the meeting at which, if we were face-to-face, which we weren't, we did it virtually, but if we had been face-to-face, we would all sign the cover page for the annual report that we have all contributed to. So this year we did that in a virtual way. We got everybody's signatures, but it wasn't face-to-face. At that point, once it's finalized, the report, it goes into the Department of Defense for review and approval. That generally takes up until the March timeframe. So it's generally in the March timeframe. Typically, if we're fortunate, we will have the report be released by the Secretary of Defense's office in time for our March quarterly business meeting, at which point we always make sure that all of our sitting committee members have their personal copy of that report that's got their signature on it. So it's also hung on our website, our DACOWITS.gov website as well at that point, once the Secretary of Defense or his office has released it.
Awesome.
This year, I would say that given that we're in a changeover in administration, all bets are off in terms of whether or not we're going to hit that March timeline, but I'm hopeful that we will.
Excellent, ma'am. So we have time for one more question. So, and this one is obviously personal to our organizations. How do organizations like SSLA and DACOWITS benefit one another in developing their missions and supporting policies?
So, Lanny, I think that much of what DACOWITS does is a central focus of what SSLA is interested in as well. So here's what I would encourage. I would encourage, since we are chartered by the Department of Defense and we are given specific study topics, we don't have the opportunity to pick and choose. We have the opportunity to recommend, but ultimately the study topics that we are handed, that we review on that annual cycle that I mentioned, are topics of great importance to the Department of Defense. And I think there could be some great opportunity for SSLA to be aware of the work that DACOWITS is doing on that annual basis. Certainly anybody in the public can attend our quarterly business meeting. Anybody in the public, to include members of SSLA, could submit public comments to the committee for our consideration. And so there are ways in which I believe we could realize benefits as a DACOWITS committee from the focus areas of SSLA. And I think the same is true in reverse. In fact, it's been my experience that at times, in fact, I think throughout my entire tenure on the committee there, some of my committee members on DACOWITS are also entrenched and very active in SSLA. So that kind of creates more of the informal ability to kind of cross-pollinate between the two entities. But I think there are also other formal ways in which we can understand where the focus areas are of each of us and see where that overlap occurs.
Oh, I agree, General. Absolutely agree. So it is 1:53. I'll actually ask you one more question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. So I found it interesting when you were talking, the perspective on what was happening in the services with respect to women, specifically the comment of experienced gender bias because of the male-dominated military culture of the time. And obviously this is This is going back to the start of DACOWITS, the inception of it. One could submit that the male-dominated military culture still very much exists. When you look at the percentages of women that are actually serving in uniform today, do you feel the culture has changed significantly from 1951 to today? And if so, how?
So I'll answer that one in a very personal way as well, which is maybe what I'm best suited to answer it. So if I look back on my career, Lenny, 35 years, 39 when you count the academy time, I like to say that I saw huge progress just in one person's lifetime of service in the military. When I first came in to the academy, they brought in at the Air Force Academy 10% of the incoming class to be women. And the reason they chose 10% was because that was representative of the demographics at the time of the total number of women serving throughout the United States Air Force. So fast forward 39 years. And we had doubled that in the Air Force. Substantial improvement, right? A far better representation, a doubling. You might look at the demographics in this country and say, you know, are we done yet? And my answer would be personally, no, we're not. There is still a huge talent pool to tap before I'd think that the department would say, yeah, we've got the number of women that we think we need to really succeed. But progress, substantial progress. When I first entered, women weren't serving at all levels, right? In all grades and all ranks, and they are now. And so now it's not an anomaly to realize that women can, in fact, achieve those highest levels. When I first came in, there were many career fields that were close to women, many. In fact, the aviation career fields were just opening up for the first time. And now, as you know, it was really post my retirement, the Secretary of Defense mandated that all positions would be open to women. It was later that year in 2015. And when I first came in, some of those rule sets were still in place. That the rule sets that I mentioned, there were still executive orders on the books that prohibited women who became pregnant from continuing to serve. There was an expectation that you would separate, that you could be forced to separate, and you could ask for waivers if you wanted to continue to serve. And so that decision on the part of a woman on whether she could balance a military career with a family wasn't even on the scope when I first arrived. And it is now. Now it's a challenge of how do I do it, not can I do it. And so I think that there has been huge progress. Do I think we're done? No. Do I think that there are still areas that need to be addressed? Yes. I firmly believe that the national security of this country hinges on tapping the talent that this country has to provide to execute our important mission sets. And that means both men and women, right? If we hamstring ourselves by not tapping the talent that's available from the women in this country, then I maintain we are not able to execute those missions to the best of our ability. So is it still male dominated? I think yes, you'd have to say that just by looking at the pure numbers. Have I seen progress? I'd say yes, huge progress. Are we done? No, still more progress to be made.
All right, thank you.
And which pulls me right back to DACOWITS and the importance of the work that this committee does. Okay, I had to have that last comment in there.
Full circle, right? No, thank you very much, General. I appreciate your time with us today. For those of us joining, or for those of you joining us, join us next time as we discuss the topic of the sky's the limit. We have it set for Monday, December 21st. I ask that you check in with our website, cleader.org, down the road and see what time that is for registration, as we're still setting things up. But I can guarantee you that the first female Blue Angel pilot, Marine Corps Major Kate German Cook, and a few other women aviators will share their stories, and we'll probably find it very interesting to find out what it was like to be the first female first in the cockpit. So become an SSLA member. I'm just really quick going to go over this before Zoom shoves us out of here, but I would ask you to go to cleader.org and consider joining. There are a lot of benefits to being a part of this organization. Is we just asked the general the question about the relationship between SSLA and DACOWITS. It gives us an opportunity to be an influencer in not only policy change, but in our fellow leaders, to be able to network and mentor with them. SSLA is the only national nonprofit organization dedicated to the mentorship and development of women leaders in the sea services. And we actually have all three of the other services that come to our conferences as well. So I ask you to give it a look. see if it's something for you. Reach out to me, reach out to any of the board members, and we'd be happy to talk to you about the benefits of being with SSLA. So there's only one more of these webinar sessions left. So again, please go to cleader.org, check out the time and date, obviously the 21st, and register. Get in there and listen to what those young ladies have to say. And all of our other webinar sessions are on YouTube, or more importantly, our Facebook page. And I invite you to join us on any one of our social media entities listed there at the bottom of it. And a plug for our SSLA Joint Women's Leadership Symposium and Career and Transitioning Seminar for 2021. We have it set for Norfolk, Virginia, which is where it was supposed to be this year. And the dates will be 31 August to 2 September. It is the largest gathering of women in uniform and focused on personal and professional development. So I encourage you to give it a shot and join us. Janet Wolfenbarger, I did it again, Wolfenbarger, has spoken at our conference before, and I've been a panelist, and I think you would find it very informative. So with that, thank you, and I kept it on time, so our host, Julia, is not going to kill me. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Again, General, thank you for joining us for this webinar session.
You're welcome, and thank you again for inviting me.
Yes, ma'am.